Welcome to Holistic Health for Happy Kids, the podcast where we dive into the root causes of children's health challenges and explore natural solutions to help little ones thrive. I'm Lisa, a passionate pediatric naturopath and mum of 3, dedicated to empowering parents with practical tips and expert insights to raise healthy, happy kids. Each episode will unpack common childhood health concerns like allergies, eczema, fussy eating, and gut health, and share evidence-based advice to support your child's wellness naturally. Let's create a generation of thriving children, one holistic step at a time. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Welcome to this solo episode of Holistic Health for Happy Kids, where we're going to be talking about ARFID. So beyond the diagnosis and looking at ARFID through a holistic lens. So this is a very important topic to me because every day in clinic we see children who either have an ARFID diagnosis or probably should have an ARFID diagnosis, and these families are really struggling. It affects the whole family, it affects dynamics, it affects breakfast, lunch, and dinner, it affects sleep, it affects behavior, it affects everything in the family. And parents obviously feel terrible about this situation and how it has arisen. But I think it's really important to understand that with ARFID, it's not actually a failure on the parents' part. There is something inherently going on in that child's body that is preventing them enjoying food. So as human beings, we are hardwired to, enjoy food, to love food, to love to want to eat. And with children with ARFID, something is stopping that from happening. And if we can find out what it is that is stopping them enjoying food and wanting to eat, well, then we're on the road to recovery. But it's not bad parenting. It's not a lack of boundaries. And I think it's often good for parents to look at their other children who probably eat, relatively typically, and then see their child with ARFID. So clearly, same parent, same family dynamics. One child has an issue, the other ones don't. And it's definitely not because parents aren't trying hard enough, because of course they're trying extremely hard, because practically, realistically, what parent wants to make multiple different dinners every day? So of course, parents are trying to address this, but often it's a case of they're not being given the actual help that they need. We might be able to palliate their symptoms in some way by giving them Pediasure or, some other thing, but they're not getting the actual in-depth help that they need. So today I'm going to be talking about what ARFID actually is and why it is so misunderstood. I'm going to be talking about the gut-brain connection in ARFID because to me, this is really the clincher that nobody is addressing. We're going to be talking about the 3 main drivers that I see clinically, what works and what doesn't work, and I'm going to give you some ideas of what you can start to do straight away. So ARFID is a relatively new diagnosis in the DSM, which is like the Bible of mental health diagnosis. And ARFID stands for Avoidant Restrictive Food Intake Disorder. And it's not just fussy eating. It's much more than that. It's something that causes distress day in, day out for that child. So fussy eating is a preference. Many children go through phases of fussy eating where they won't want to eat, green vegetables for a while, or they won't want to eat, mushy foods for a while, but it doesn't affect their everyday life, and it's just kind of a bit of a preference. And if I walked into a restaurant and they served me some sort of gooey slop, I wouldn't want to eat it. So that makes me a bit fussy. If I go for a coffee and it tastes like it's been burnt, I don't want to eat it. So again, that makes me a bit fussy. Does it cause me distress? No, except that I've just paid for a coffee that I can't drink. Does it affect my everyday life? No. But ARFID is where kids will panic at the thought of food, at the sight of food, panic at the thought of even having a meal at the dinner table with other people who are eating, and they will gag. So the first time I really saw a child who was in this extreme nervous system distress around food was a boy that I met who was about 7 at the time, and I was doing feeding therapy with his younger brother, not with him. But he just walked into the room where we were playing with ham. So ham was one of his younger brother's non-preferred foods, and we were trying to introduce him to this as a, food he could pack in his lunchbox. And the older child saw the ham and just started to dry retch and gag. Just, I wasn't talking to him. I wasn't suggesting that he join the session and try the ham. He wasn't involved at all. He just worked into the room. And that was really the first time I saw this whole body physiological reaction to a non-preferred food. And that's what can happen. Kids will just shut down. So their nervous system will just shut down at the thought of food and they'll feel unsafe eating. But I think it's very important when we use the word safe and unsafe, we shouldn't refer to their foods that they eat as their safe foods. Because if we talk about the foods that they eat as their safe foods, we are therefore categorizing the foods that they don't eat as unsafe. And those foods are not unsafe unless your child has an allergy to them, unless the foods are unsafe from a food hygiene perspective, or they're inedible for some other reason. They're not unsafe. And it's much better that we talk about preferred and non-preferred foods. And a personal example I could use for this is my daughter used to be anaphylactic to eggs, and she grew out of it when she was about 6. So for the first, from age 1 to age 6, I kept saying, don't eat the eggs will kill you. Don't eat the birthday cake will kill you. And so I drummed into her for 5 years, eggs are unsafe. Do not eat them. And that is correct because she went into anaphylactic shock one time when she was exposed to a tiny amount of egg in a burger. So that was correct. But then when we went to do the food challenge in the hospital, all of a sudden I'm saying, right, we're going to eat eggs. What do you think the chances of her turning around and saying, sure, we'll eat the eggs now? Not a chance. We were trying to put it into ice cream. We were trying to put it into chocolate. We were trying to put the egg in everything because I had told her whole life, eggs are unsafe for you. So try to move towards the term of preferred and non-preferred foods. So one of the biggest problems I see with this whole, feeding and eating disorder realm is that very often parents are told things like they'll just grow out of it, they won't starve, just hold your boundaries. And, with the mild fussy eating that we talked about, that kind of normal developmental stage, they will grow out of it. But you should always see the trajectory of being things getting better, not the trajectory of things getting worse and children losing foods. And they won't starve is really bad advice because some of these children will starve because their body has shut down. They cannot eat these foods. If you take away their preferred foods, they won't eat. They might not eat for a week and they'll end up in hospital. And, so this advice does not work for kids with ARFID because it's not behavioral. There's some physiological reason underlying their lack of interest in food. In all the kids I've dealt with eating issues, I can say not one of them I have found the underlying root cause to be stubbornness. It is not stubbornness that's stopping these children from eating, I guarantee it. It's not manipulation. They're not trying to manipulate you. As I say, it's a very natural, normal thing to want to eat. And if your child doesn't want to do that, there is a really strong reason why. So it's, we need to make their nervous system feel more comfortable and, make their body feel able to eat. So the gut brain connection is something that will never be discussed, as far as I can see, in the kind of normal conventional model of treating ARFID. And that's a big problem because this is one of the big drivers that makes this a real physiological response, not just a behavioral issue. So if a child has a restricted diet, so it's low in fiber, it's low in protein, and it's high in processed foods, their gut microbiome will change. And, sometimes we talk about the gut as being our second brain, and actually we're moving more towards saying your gut is your first brain because your emotional well-being, your mood, your thoughts are all affected by what happens in your gut. So when you're not eating enough fiber and eating too many processed foods, your gut bacteria are being starved because those ultra processed foods are getting digested way too soon. There's no, we used to call it roughage back in the day. There's no roughage getting through to feed your gut microbiome. Your neurotransmitters change. So that's your happy or you're not happy chemicals in your brain. Your mood changes, your appetite will actually change, and your sensory processing capabilities will change. So restricted eating causes gut changes, causes brain changes, which causes more restrictive eating. So just keeping offering foods doesn't work because we're dealing with the biology, not just the behavior. And so, how do we change this? Obviously, we would love to say, well, just give them more fiber, but clearly that's not going to work. So, clinically, what we do is we give lots of probiotics and prebiotics as our, you know, initial sort of treatment. And the beauty of probiotics and prebiotics is that they're tasteless white powders. If your child drinks anything, really, you can put a prebiotic and a probiotic in it. Obviously, in water, they are going to taste it, but if they drink anything else, they won't taste them. Once children get to the age of being able to swallow capsules, then probiotics will often come in a capsule. Prebiotics still don't because there's too much of it to put in a capsule. But those are really easy ways to start to change your child's gut microbiome, which will change their thoughts and their emotions. And well, we've got many favorite prebiotics, but one of my favorite prebiotics is GOS, galacto-oligosaccharides, because they've shown in adults that after 12 weeks of taking a daily dose of this prebiotic, then anxiety significantly decreases because of the gut-brain connection. So parents are seeing things like food refusal, meltdowns, anxiety around food, and therefore limited diet. But what we as holistic practitioners can see underneath that is that they may well have a pain in their tummy. And children who have had a pain in their tummy their whole life don't actually know that that's not normal. So I've had children who have been about 10 years of age, and I've treated them for fussy eating, constipation, those sort of, toileting issues. And after I've treated them with prebiotics and probiotics and a few other things, they turn around to the parents and say, oh, it doesn't hurt when I do a poo anymore. And the parents are like, what? And they've been experiencing these issues for 10 years, but they just thought it was normal that you eat, you feel pain, you go to the toilet, you feel pain, which therefore put them off doing both of those things, eating and going to the toilet. So just because your child is not articulating gut pain doesn't mean they don't have it. Whether they're a verbal or a non-verbal child, they still may not be able to articulate or differentiate gut pain from normal. We often see a lot of children with reflux. So these are the grazers. These are the children that eat enough just to take the edge off their hunger, but not enough to trigger their pain in their esophagus. Sometimes the best way to tell if a child has reflux is actually a trip to the dentist because they'll be able to see on the back teeth if there's erosion, if your child can't articulate themselves that they've got reflux. But a child with reflux will definitely not want to eat. Constipation is such a common one. And can you imagine if you were constipated, you would not want to sit down and eat a big hearty meal. And some of the kids that we see with fussy eating might only be doing a poo once a week. So if I hadn't done a poo for a week, I would certainly not want to eat a wide range of foods. I would just want to eat whatever just took the edge off my hunger. We see kids with a lot of inflammation in their body for whatever reason, sometimes as a result of their diet. And then nutrient deficiencies is a big one. So kids who are fussy eaters will be low in iron and they will be low in zinc. And both iron and zinc are really important to have a robust appetite. And zinc is really important for your sense of taste and smell. And iron, if you're low in iron, you're going to be fatigued. So even if you're fatigued, you're not also going to want to sit at the dinner table and eat a really good meal. And so again, it's a vicious circle. You don't eat the foods that contain iron and zinc, like meat, essentially. You become deficient in these nutrients, and then it affects your taste, it affects your appetite. And being low in zinc will even affect your ability to digest foods because you need zinc to make your stomach acid. And if you don't have enough zinc, you won't have enough stomach acid, which means when you eat high protein foods, in particular, like meat, then they will just sit in your stomach. You know, some people say, oh, you know that feeling when you eat meat and it just sits in your stomach for hours? Like, no, you actually shouldn't have that feeling. So there are different presentations and different types of ARFID. So the first, broad category is sensory or oral motor issues. And I'm going to talk about these three different categories, but of course, children can fit into multiple categories. Life is never quite so simple as just being able to say your child has type 1, type 2. It's all, a bit of a mishmash, but it's helpful to understand the different presentations. So for children who present with more of a sensory oral motor issue, then textures are very overwhelming. So they'll have strong texture preferences in certain directions. Chewing will feel hard to them, and food is just too much. It's just overwhelming for them. So these kids will prefer their texture of choice. So that might be crunchy, it might be smooth. Doesn't necessarily fit one profile. They'll avoid meat and mixed textures. So they might be able to eat things that are all separated on a plate. But if you sat down and gave them lasagna, for instance, that would be a massive no. And they take forever to eat because their oral motor skills are not that great. Chewing is really, really hard. Moving the food around in their mouth, coordinating that swallowing is really, really hard. So then we've got the fear-based ARFID. So that will often start with an event, like a choking event or a vomiting, like a gastro bug. That's actually a really common one. A child gets a gastro bug and then their eating never goes back to the way it was. It can be because of reflux. So they get that constant reinforcement that I eat, it hurts, I eat, it hurts, or just illness in general. So now food feels actually really dangerous and risky to them. So because their nervous system is on high alert, they will panic at meal times. They'll avoid eating in public because they're so scared, and it will be a sudden, a cut off in their eating where they ate fine, then they got gastro, and now they don't eat fine anymore. And then there's the body-based or sort of the medical issues. So this one gets missed a lot. So these kids aren't scared of food, they just don't feel good eating. And they might have reflux, constipation, nausea, low appetite. And the big one that gets missed a lot is celiac disease. So every single child who is an extremely fussy eater or has an ARFID diagnosis should have a blood test to check for celiac disease, every single child. Um, and also a good thing to screen for is eosinophilic esophagitis, which is EOE for short, which is where you actually get inflammation in your esophagus. So it really, really does hurt to eat. And the food actually feels like it's getting stuck. So again, before a child is diagnosed with ARFID, they absolutely need to get screened for EOE. So now we're going to talk about why the common strategies for fussy eating will fail in children who have ARFID. And things like, putting pressure on your child, saying just one more bite, which, is kind of innocuous, but actually, if your child is really overwhelmed or anxious about food, that can be a lot of pressure. Reward charts, that's not going to work for a child with ARFID because if they could eat, they would. And forcing exposure. So really stressing a child out to get them to eat, by just like putting the foods in front of them and just making them sit with those foods for hours on end. And some of those strategies like reward charts, take one more bite, that will work with children who are just mildly fussy, and that's fine. Force feeding is never fine. But it won't work with a child whose nervous system is in overdrive or the children who are in pain when they eat. You can't, use a reward chart to get rid of pain. So whenever you do those sorts of strategies, then the child will just shut down. So their appetite will shut down. So, if you're highly stressed and in a panic state, your digestion actually stops because your priority is not to digest food in that situation. So it's really pointless to try and force a child to eat. And pressure, it's important to say as well that what you consider pressure and what a child with ARFID perceives as pressure are not the same thing. So, you could just say, look at your brother, look how he's eating his sausages. And you might think, well, that's kind of, innocuous thing to say, but for a child with ARFID, that can be very intimidating and very stressful. So how do we work with this in clinic? So we support the body first. So we support gut health. So we use things like prebiotics and probiotics, things that are going to be very easy to get into a child to start to reset their gut microbiome. We try to get them to poo every day because it's so important. So again, some of the prebiotics that we use are really good at having a child poo every day. And it's a really good poo, not like with, Movicol or Osmolax, where it's kind of the poo comes out, but it's not a great feeling. We really try and get to that big, nice sausage poo. And we correct nutritional deficiencies. So especially zinc as a starting point because I have never come across a fussy eater who wasn't low in zinc. And so it's a very safe place to start. Whereas I would never start with iron because not every fussy eater will be low in iron. Iron can be very inflammatory in your body, and children can have something called hemochromatosis, even though it's probably not diagnosed in children, they can have that genetic tendency. So giving too much iron is actually going to cause issues for them. And because we work with children all the time, like that's what we do, we use forms of these nutrients that are very kid friendly, like gummies. And I know the thought of gummies usually gives you the idea of those supermarket, really high sugar gummies, but the ones that we use are really high in therapeutic nutrients compared to the amount of sugar in them. So we regulate their nervous system. And a good way to demonstrate to a parent that their child's nervous system is out of whack is to do a hair tissue mineral analysis, because that looks at the ratio of sodium to magnesium. And if that ratio is very, very high, then they are actually in fight or flight right now. If it's very, very low, they're burnt out. And that's where you get the PDA type behaviors, the pathological demand avoidance is when they're burnout and they're just shut down to everything. So once we can see that in the HTMA, we know that that's what we need to address. We need to address the child's nervous system and their stress. So we can use herbs for that, like passion flower and lemon balm, which you think, oh, but a fussy eater is not going to take the herbs. But actually, a lot of fussy eaters are very used to taking things like Panadol. So if you present the herbs in the same way that you present the Panadol, so in a syringe, they actually have a pretty good chance of taking them. And not only that, we use glycetracts in clinic. So they're not based on ethanol, they're based on glycerol. And they're just a lot more palatable for kids. They're a lot sweeter for kids. And we just reduce stress at meal times as well. So if there is a history of force feeding or pressure, we might actually say, right, for the next month, take a picnic blanket, go out to your back garden, eat out there for a month in the sunshine, in the play, forget about the problem, so to speak. And just by dropping the pressure, the child's nervous system can calm down, and then we can, get back to it. And then because we've got feeding therapists on the team, we work on building eating skills. So actually building the child's ability to chew. And the way to do that is not to go from, just eating a dissolvable food like, a rice cake to a steak. That's not going to work. So we try and, give graded exposures to food, which is going to help the child learn how to chew. So something like beef jerky, which we would not expect the child to eat because it is extremely tough for anyone to eat. But by playing with that in their mouth and practicing chewing on it, they're starting to develop those skills. Or they might even just putting that beef jerky in their mouth will, desensitize their mouth to having foods in it, which will make it easier for them to eat. So progress with children with ARFID does not mean that, within a few weeks of working on this, they're sitting down and eating, meat and three veg with the rest of the family. Progress is more about them being less distressed around food, calm around food, and actually willing to get back and sit at the table, even if they're still eating their own foods and everybody else is eating their foods, getting them back at the table to start to expose them very, very gradually is super important. So based on this, what can you do right now? So number one, take the pressure off. No forcing, no bargaining, no bribing, no just take one bite. Just do that. Start today. And you're going to think, but they won't eat anything. But if you're thinking that your child has ARFID, I'm going to guess they're not eating anyway. So it's not working. If it was working, then we wouldn't be in this situation. Protect their preferred foods. And the way to do that is if your child only eats white toast, for instance, white toast with butter, they eat that, 5 times a day, then start to present that white toast in a different way each time. So start to cut it into triangles one time, squares the next, put on a bit more butter one time, a bit less the next. Don't fall into the trap of your child being so precise about the shape, the texture, everything about that toast, because then they will just get more and more rigid and fixated. You have to make the toast slightly different each time. Not so different that they're going to freak out and not eat it, but different enough that they notice. You can also just toast it a little bit more, toast it a little bit less. Same with if their only food is chicken nuggets, then don't fall into the trap of just letting them eat McDonald's chicken nuggets every time. Take them to KFC, take them to Hungry Jack's, do all the different chicken nuggets, because that's how we, dig ourselves out of this hole of having an ever decreasing circle of foods. And that's how you don't lose those foods. Because if you just let a child eat white toast with butter for every meal, that they will stop eating that food one day, I guarantee it. And then you'll have lost that food. Whereas if we can keep in the white toast and maybe after a month or two, expand it to, wholemeal toast, then we can start to build up the range of foods. At the dinner table, focus on connecting with your child. Forget about the food. Don't talk about the food. Talk about their day. What was the best thing? What was the worst thing? Just take the focus away from food and watching your child eat and measuring their food. And look at patterns. So look at days when they eat better, days when they eat worse, and try and correlate it to, did they actually do swimming lessons that day and therefore they're calmer, they've burnt through some energy and they're more ready to eat. Because then you can just do swimming lessons 3 or 4 times a week. Are they better after they've done a poo? So if they do a poo one morning and then they eat a bigger breakfast, is that a pattern? Because then okay, so we need to just give lots of prebiotics, lots of probiotics, lots of water, and maybe even electrolytes to help your child poo every day. And trust your instincts. If you think that there is something wrong with your child's eating, follow that up, because there may well be, and you may need professional help. I'm not saying that every fussy eater needs professional help, but if things are getting worse over time, if this is a major stress on your family's dynamics, if your child's circle of foods is decreasing, then you need to get help. So you're not overreacting if this is your child. You're not alone, and there is something that you can do about it. Because I guess my biggest concern is that people get an ARFID diagnosis and they can't think that's the end of the line because it's ARFID. There's nothing that we can do, but there is so much that we can do. But you need to approach it holistically. Just doing feeding therapy won't work. Just giving a zinc supplement won't work. And that's what we do in our team. We address it holistically. We look at all of these different things. We talk a lot about parents as well, and what the parents are eating, how the parents are demonstrating their relationship with food. That's also a really important thing to talk about. So we look at the root cause. We take a body first approach, not a behavioral approach. And if you would like to know more, just reply to this podcast or contact me on Instagram, the Pediatric Naturopath, or send me an email, admin@thepediatricnaturopath.com.au. And if you have NDIS funding for your child, we have a lot of nutritionists on our team and a dietitian who qualify for NDIS funding. So you may well be able to use your NDIS funding to see us. Thanks for tuning in to Holistic Health for Happy Kids. I hope you found today's episode helpful and inspiring on your journey to raise thriving, healthy little ones. Remember, small, consistent changes can lead to big transformations. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with other parents who might benefit. You can also follow me on Instagram and Facebook at The Pediatric Naturopath for more tips, tools, and inspiration. If you've got a question or a topic you'd love to hear about, please send me a message. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, take care and keep supporting your kids in the most natural, nurturing ways possible.